Maya and Jamal couldn't believe their luck. It was a beautiful Saturday evening, and they were dressed to the nines for the highly anticipated gala. The event had been a big deal all month, and they were excited to attend. Their father, Richard, was the CEO of a major tech company, and his position had granted them exclusive VIP seats at the event. The invitation had arrived a week earlier, and the siblings were eager to experience something so special. Arriving at the venue, they could feel the energy buzzing around them. The lights were bright, and the music played softly in the background, creating an atmosphere of excitement. The red carpet was rolled out, and people in elegant attire walked in, chatting and laughing with one another. Maya and Jamal exchanged excited glances, both impressed by the grandeur of the event. They had never been to something this extravagant before, and it felt like a dream. As they walked through the lobby, a staff member greeted them with a warm smile. "Good evening. You must be Maya and Jamal," she said, referring to the names on the invitation. "Welcome. Let me show you to your seats." The staff member led them through the crowd, past other guests who were enjoying the drinks and appetizers. Maya and Jamal felt like they were part of something important as they followed the woman to the VIP section. When they reached their seats, the siblings were stunned. The chairs were positioned perfectly, facing the stage, and each had a small sign with their names on it. The VIP area was beautifully decorated, with flowers and candles placed on every table. Everything was perfect. This was their moment to shine, a special night that would be remembered for years to come. They settled into their seats, excited to take in the performances and enjoy the atmosphere. They smiled at each other, feeling proud of how far they had come. Their father, Richard, had worked hard to get to where he was, and this evening was a reflection of his success. Maya felt like this was her chance to be part of the world her father had built. Jamal, always the more reserved of the two, was just happy to be there and see everything unfold. They exchanged stories and laughs as the night began. But then, just as they were beginning to relax and enjoy themselves, a staff member approached. A man in a uniform, looking uncomfortable, walked over to their table. His face didn't show the same warmth as the others they had encountered. He hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Excuse me," the man said, his tone a little too formal. "We have made a mistake with your seating arrangements. These seats are meant for other guests. I need you to vacate them immediately." Maya and Jamal stared at him in disbelief. "What?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "These seats are reserved for us. We have the invitation right here." She pointed to the sign with their names on it. She had hoped that would settle the confusion. The staff member didn't seem fazed. "I'm sorry, but we've been informed that these seats were mistakenly assigned to you. We need you to move so that the proper guests can sit here." Jamal looked at Maya, feeling the tension building. He wanted to speak up, but Maya had already opened her mouth. "No," she said firmly. "These are our seats. We've been assigned these seats by the event organizers. We're not moving." The staff member didn't back down. "I understand," he said, but his voice was cold. "But it's a mistake. The other guests need these seats. You'll have to move, please." Maya could feel her heart racing. She glanced around, seeing that no one else was being asked to move. Other guests, some of whom were sitting much closer to the stage, weren't even being questioned. She could feel the unfairness of the situation starting to weigh heavily on her. She turned to Jamal, but his face was filled with confusion. He could sense what was happening, too. Maya felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't just a mistake. It was something more. Why were they being singled out? Why weren't other people being asked to leave? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the request had nothing to do with seating arrangements. It was about something deeper. She stood up slowly, trying to stay calm. "We're not going anywhere," she said firmly, but with a hint of frustration creeping into her voice. We belong here. This is where we're supposed to be. The staff member's face hardened, and he glanced around nervously, perhaps looking for backup. Please, just come with me, he insisted. Maya's thoughts were spinning, and for a moment, she considered the possibility that maybe they had made a mistake. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. They weren't in the wrong. The seats had their names on them. They were invited to the event just like everyone else, but something wasn't right. Jamal, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. Why are you asking us to move? He asked, his voice steady but firm. You're not asking anyone else to leave their seats. What's going on? The staff member seemed to hesitate, clearly uncomfortable with the questions. It's just a mistake. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. But you need to vacate the seats. His eyes darted nervously from Maya and Jamal to the rest of the room. Maya's heart sank. She was starting to understand what was happening, and the realization made her stomach churn. The staff member wasn't acting like this because of a simple mistake. He was treating them differently. He was singling them out because of their race. She could see it now how the staff member had approached them differently than other guests. The other VIPs weren't being questioned, weren't being asked to move. It didn't make sense. This wasn't about the seats. This was about them. Her mind raced. She knew she couldn't stay quiet. Jamal was already standing, looking at their father's assistant on the other side of the room. He was probably waiting for the right moment to call their dad. We're not leaving, Maya said firmly. We'll stay right here. The staff member took a step back. I'll have to call security, he warned, as though they were the ones in the wrong. Do what you have to do, Maya replied, her voice stronger now. She wasn't going to let this slide. Not tonight. Not ever. Maya and Jamal stood their ground, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. The room around them was bustling with excitement, yet they felt like they were in a strange bubble, isolated from everyone else. Maya's eyes scanned the crowd. Guests in the VIP area were laughing, chatting, and enjoying the evening as if everything was normal. No one else seemed to be facing the same treatment they were. The staff member, who had been persistent in asking them to leave, stepped away for a moment. It was as if he was trying to gather his thoughts or perhaps get instructions from someone else. Maya looked at Jamal, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. She could tell he was equally bewildered by what was happening. Neither of them had ever experienced anything like this before. They had grown up in a world where their father's success had opened doors and provided opportunities. But now, at this moment, they felt as though they were being treated as if they didn't belong. Maya took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew she needed to stay calm. Jamal, ever the peacemaker, was quiet. He stood beside her, his body tense, waiting for the next step. He could see that Maya was upset, and he was trying to figure out what to do next. When the staff member returned, he was not alone. A man in a suit, who appeared to be the event manager, walked up behind him. The new arrival looked more official, and his posture was rigid, as if he were prepared for confrontation. The manager's eyes briefly scanned Maya and Jamal before turning to the staff member. He didn't seem surprised by the situation, which made Maya's heart sink even further. I'm afraid you'll have to leave, the manager said coldly, his voice authoritative, but not necessarily kind. These seats have been mistakenly assigned to you. We're going to need to have you move so the proper guests can sit here. Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Jamal placed a hand on her arm, his expression calm but determined. He wanted to handle this without escalating things. He knew it was important to stay composed, but the way they were being treated was simply wrong. I don't understand, Jamal said quietly, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. We have the invitation. These seats are reserved for us. Why are you asking us to leave? The manager's eyes narrowed slightly. He took a step closer, making Maya feel even more uncomfortable. This is a simple mistake. I'm sure it was an oversight, but we need you to vacate these seats immediately, he said, his voice sharp, as if he were running out of patience. Maya clenched her fists in her lap. She was trying to hold back the anger that was bubbling up inside her. She had been in many situations where things didn't go as planned, but this felt different. This felt personal. They weren't being asked to move because of a simple mistake. No, this was something deeper. She couldn't put her finger on it yet, but she knew they were being singled out. Why are you doing this to us? Maya asked, her voice louder now, filled with a mix of confusion and hurt. Why are we the only ones being asked to leave? Why is no one else being moved? The manager shifted uncomfortably. He glanced around the VIP section as if searching for an answer, but none came. His discomfort was evident, and Maya saw the hesitation in his eyes. It was a brief moment, but it was enough for her to understand that he knew exactly what was happening. You don't understand, he said, trying to control his tone. This is for your own good. It's better if you just cooperate. Maya stared at him, feeling a sense of injustice wash over her. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. This wasn't about the seats. This wasn't even about the mistake he claimed had been made. This was something much bigger. It was about the way they were being treated, as though they were not worthy of being in the VIP section, despite the clear evidence that they belonged there. Jamal stepped in again, his voice firm but respectful. We're not leaving, he said. These seats are for us, and we're staying right here. The manager's face flushed. He wasn't used to being defied, especially not in front of other high-profile guests. He glanced at the staff member who had originally approached Maya and Jamal, then back at the siblings. It was clear that he wasn't sure what to do next. Please, the manager said, his tone shifting, almost pleading. I really don't want to cause a scene. But you need to move. We're running a very high-profile event here, and this isn't the right place for you. The word stung. Maya could feel her heart racing as the unfairness of the situation hit her all at once. The subtle insult behind the manager's words wasn't lost on her. The message was clear, you don't belong here. Jamal could see Maya's anger rising. He didn't want her to get upset, but he understood why she was angry. He was angry too, but he didn't want to make things worse. We're not asking for anything special, Jamal said. We just want to stay in the seats that were assigned to us. No one else is being asked to move. Why are we being treated like this? The manager shifted uncomfortably again. He seemed to be running out of excuses. I'll have to call security, he said reluctantly, his voice losing some of its earlier authority. This isn't something I can handle alone. Maya glanced at Jamal, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been in a situation like this before. She had heard about discrimination, of course, but she never thought it would happen to her. Not like this. Not in a place where she thought she was safe, among people who were supposed to be her equals. We're not going anywhere, Maya said firmly, her voice shaking slightly but resolute. You can call whoever you want, but we're staying right here. The manager hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over his phone. He was considering whether to escalate the situation or to back off. He wasn't used to having people challenge him, especially not guests of this importance. The seconds stretched into what felt like an eternity. Then, with a sigh, the manager finally lowered his phone. Fine, he said, clearly not pleased. But don't expect special treatment just because you're here with your father. The mention of their father, Richard, stung like a slap in the face. It was as if he was trying to remind them that no matter how high their status, they would never be accepted. Maya felt the weight of his words, but she wasn't going to back down. She had every right to be there, and she wasn't going to let anyone make her feel less than. Jamal gave Maya a reassuring glance. He could see how upset she was, but he was proud of her for standing her ground. They didn't have to prove anything to anyone. They were already where they were meant to be. Maya and Jamal stood silently, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The event manager had just walked away, leaving them in the VIP section where the murmurs of other guests swirled around them, barely registering in the heavy silence they felt. The idea that they were being treated this way simply because of their race was hard to comprehend. They had never been in a situation like this before, and it made them feel isolated and small in a place that was supposed to be welcoming. Maya's mind raced, but her thoughts kept circling back to one thing: how could this be happening? Why were they being singled out? They had the invitation, the proof that they belonged here, yet it didn't seem to matter. What was more infuriating was the casual, dismissive way the manager had spoken to them. It was as though they didn't even matter. Jamal, still standing beside her, looked over at her with concern. He could see the frustration written all over her face. Maya was strong, but even she was struggling to hold it together. Jamal, who was usually the quieter one of the two, could tell that Maya needed something to hold onto in this moment, something to give her strength. He gave her a small nod, trying to reassure her without words. "Let's call Dad," Jamal suggested, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. He had seen the way the staff member and manager treated them, and he knew the only person who could fix this was their father. Maya hesitated for a moment, but then she nodded. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. The weight of the decision was clear. Calling their father wasn't something they did lightly, especially when it came to handling problems at events like these. But this was different. What had just happened was wrong, and it wasn't something they were willing to ignore. Maya dialed the number she knew by heart. She didn't need to think about it, she just pressed the button, the one that would connect her to their father, the man who had always taken charge, who had always known what to do. This time, though, she wasn't sure how things would play out. There was a sense of helplessness that she couldn't shake. The phone rang once, twice, and then she heard the familiar, deep voice on the other end. "Maya." "Jamal." Richard's voice was calm, but there was an undertone of concern in it. He always knew when something wasn't right. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" Maya swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions in check. She knew she needed to speak clearly, to explain what had happened without getting too upset. But the words were hard to form. The unfairness of the situation was overwhelming, and she felt a knot tighten in her stomach. We were asked to leave our seats, Dad," Maya said, her voice cracking slightly. "They said it was a mistake, but they wouldn't listen to us. We've been treated like we don't belong here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maya could almost feel her father's mind processing the information. Richard wasn't the kind of person to react impulsively. He was thoughtful, calculated, and always knew how to handle difficult situations. But there was no mistaking the sharp edge of frustration that crept into his voice when he spoke next. "What do you mean they asked you to leave?" he asked, his tone now more serious. "What did they say exactly?" Maya could feel the tension building in her chest as she recounted the entire incident. She told him about the staff member approaching them, how he insisted that their seats were meant for other guests, and how the event manager had acted dismissively when they stood up for themselves. She told him everything, from the uncomfortable feeling of being singled out to the point where they were left standing in the VIP section, without any real explanation. Richard listened carefully, absorbing every word. He didn't interrupt, but Maya could hear his breathing on the other end, the steady rhythm of someone trying to maintain control. Jamal, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Dad, they didn't ask anyone else to leave. It was just us. We don't know why." Maya could feel her father's anger through the phone, even though he hadn't said much. She knew that tone he wasn't one to be angry easily, but when something wasn't right, he didn't let it slide. Richard was a man of integrity, and he had raised them to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. "I'll handle it," Richard said firmly. "You stay right where you are. I'll make some calls." Maya felt a rush of relief, a small but important wave of comfort. She knew that when her father said he would handle something, it would be taken care of. He was the kind of person who didn't back down from challenges, especially when they involved fairness and respect. "I'll be right there," he added. "Don't move." The call ended, but Maya remained holding the phone for a moment, trying to calm her nerves. She didn't know what her father would do, but just hearing his voice had made her feel a little less alone. For the first time since the incident began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Jamal stood beside her, his expression calm but thoughtful. He could see that Maya was still upset, but he could also sense the quiet strength in her now. Their father's promise to fix things had given her something to hold on to. As they waited, Maya looked around at the other guests in the VIP section. They were still talking, still enjoying themselves, but now the noise felt distant to her. The world around them hadn't changed, but they had. They had been made to feel like outsiders in a place where they should have been treated with respect. But soon, they wouldn't be ignored anymore. They wouldn't let this injustice stand. A few minutes later, Maya's phone rang again. It was her father. "Listen, I've spoken to the organizers," Richard said, his voice calm but filled with authority. "They're aware of the situation now, and the staff involved are being dealt with. I've made it clear that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. I'll be contacting the event CEO personally to ensure that this never happens again." Maya's heart lifted at his words. She could hear the finality in his voice, and she knew that things would be handled. She wasn't sure how everything would play out, but one thing was certain: her father's presence, even from a distance, was enough to make things right. "We're not going anywhere, Dad," Maya said, her voice steady now. "We're staying here. We belong here." "You're right," Richard said, his voice softer now. "Stay put. I'll take care of the rest. Just don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." As the call ended, Maya looked over at Jamal. His face broke into a small, reassuring smile. "It's going to be okay," he said, his voice calm. Maya nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. They had made the right call. With their father handling it, they knew the situation would be taken care of. They were not just guests at this event, they were deserving of respect and dignity, just like everyone else in that room. And soon, they would see just how much their father's influence could change the situation. The minutes felt like hours as Maya and Jamal sat quietly in their seats, waiting for their father's intervention. The tension between them and the event staff was still thick in the air, but something had shifted. It wasn't just the unfairness of the situation anymore, it was the certainty that it was going to change. Maya and Jamal had done the right thing by calling their father, and now they could feel that change coming. The buzz of the event continued around them, but Maya barely noticed it. The sound of people chatting and laughing seemed distant, almost as if the world was moving in slow motion. She kept her eyes on the entrance, hoping to see someone come in to fix the situation, someone who would make it right. She had no idea what her father had done so far, but she trusted him. He had always been there for them, and now, he was fighting for them. Jamal, on the other hand, seemed a little more composed. He sat back in his chair, glancing around the room, but he too was focused on the task at hand. He knew that, with their father involved, things would be handled swiftly. The uncertainty of the past few minutes was gone, replaced by a sense of anticipation. His thoughts kept returning to the same question: how far would their father go to ensure that this wasn't just swept under the rug? Maya's phone rang again, snapping both of them out of their thoughts. Maya quickly grabbed it, her heart skipping a beat as she saw her father's name appear on the screen. "Dad," she answered, her voice filled with both relief and curiosity. "I've spoken to the event CEO," Richard said immediately, his voice calm but firm. "They're aware of the situation, and they're going to take full responsibility. The staff involved have been called in for questioning. I've made it clear that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, and I've insisted that appropriate actions be taken." Maya felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had expected nothing less from her father. He was always so sure of himself, so decisive, and she could tell from his tone that he wasn't going to let anyone get away with what had happened. "They're handling it," Richard continued. "But just to be clear, I've made it clear that they need to issue a public apology, and they will be doing so in the next half hour. I won't tolerate anything less than full accountability." Maya could hear the finality in his voice, and it made her feel stronger. Her father was taking care of everything. It wasn't just about them being asked to leave the seats anymore. It was about making sure that no one else would face the same discrimination in the future. She could feel the injustice of the situation slipping away, replaced by a sense of victory. This wasn't just their fight, it was bigger than that. Jamal, who had been listening quietly, smiled. He could see the relief on Maya's face, and he knew that their father's involvement had made all the difference. They weren't alone in this fight anymore. They had their father's strength and determination behind them. "We're not going anywhere," Maya said, her voice steady now. "We'll stay right here, Dad." "Thank you." "I'll be there soon," Richard replied. "Stay where you are, and don't let anyone make you feel unwelcome." Maya hung up the phone, her heart lighter than it had been all evening. She glanced over at Jamal, who gave her an encouraging nod. They were no longer worried about the situation spiraling out of control. They knew that with their father's intervention, things were going to be made right. Minutes later, the event manager returned to their table. His face was tense, and there was an air of discomfort about him. He didn't approach them immediately but instead stood at a distance, glancing over at them nervously. Maya met his gaze with calm eyes, refusing to let him see the emotions that had been running wild inside her earlier. She was ready for whatever he had to say, but she wasn't going to back down. "Excuse me," the manager said after a moment, his voice a little less confident than before. "I wanted to personally apologize for what happened earlier. There was a misunderstanding about your seating, and I regret that you were treated in this way." Maya didn't say anything right away. She wanted to see if he meant what he was saying or if this was just a formality. She glanced over at Jamal, who was waiting for her cue. Finally, Maya spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Thank you for the apology," she said. "But it's not just about the seats. It's about how we were treated. We were made to feel like we didn't belong here, like we were taking someone else's place. That's not acceptable." The manager nodded, though his face remained tight. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm truly sorry for the way this all happened." Maya could see that he wasn't really apologizing to her, but she was willing to let that slide for now. The apology, however, wasn't enough. She knew that this wasn't just about the moment. It was about making sure things were done right, making sure that what had happened didn't happen again. "I've made sure the staff is being reviewed," the manager continued. "They are fully aware of the mistake. This will be handled appropriately, and I promise that this won't happen again." Maya and Jamal exchanged a glance. Maya could tell that Jamal was satisfied with the manager's response, and she could feel herself starting to let go of the tension in her chest. She knew that their father's involvement had made all the difference. This wasn't just a simple apology, it was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and that was important. Before the manager could say anything else, Maya spoke again. "I appreciate the apology, but it's not enough to just apologize to us. You need to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else in the future. It's about making things right, not just saying the words. The manager looked taken aback by her words but nodded. Of course, he said quietly. I'll make sure that the necessary steps are taken. As the manager walked away, Maya felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't just that the situation was resolved, it was that she had stood up for what was right. She had spoken out when she could have stayed silent, and it had made a difference. The apology wasn't just for her and Jamal, it was a signal that things needed to change. Jamal looked over at Maya, his face brightening. Well, that was something, huh? Maya smiled, finally feeling the tension leave her shoulders. Yeah, she said softly. But I think we made our point. As they sat back in their seats, the crowd around them began to take on a different feeling. The music seemed louder, the conversations more vibrant. The night wasn't perfect, but it was better now. They had fought back, and things had changed. They hadn't just been passive recipients of the situation, they had made a difference. And as the minutes ticked by, Maya and Jamal realized that this night would be one they would never forget, not because of the incident, but because of how they had handled it. With the strength of their father's support, they had turned a negative experience into a moment of empowerment. The night had taken a turn for the better, but Maya and Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that what had happened wasn't just about them. As the event continued around them, they sat back in their VIP seats, taking in the music and the lights, but their minds were still processing everything that had unfolded. They had come to the gala expecting a night of celebration, but instead, they had been forced to confront something much deeper, something far more important than an evening out. The manager's apology was well-meaning, but it felt hollow at first. Maya and Jamal had been treated unfairly, and no matter how sincere his words were, they knew that what had happened wasn't just a mistake. It was a reminder of the world they lived in, a world where people like them could still be made to feel less than, even in spaces where they should have been treated as equals. But as the night wore on, Maya's thoughts shifted. The more she thought about their father's involvement, the more she understood the power of having someone who cared enough to act, someone who wasn't afraid to speak up, even when it meant standing up to people with influence. She realized that what had happened to them wasn't just about seats in a VIP section. It was a small part of something much larger, a fight for dignity and respect, not just for them, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel out of place. Jamal, always the more reserved of the two, had been quiet for most of the evening. But now, as they sat together in their seats, he spoke up. His voice was calm, but there was a sense of certainty behind it. You know, he began, this whole thing, it's not just about us being asked to move. It's about what happens next. It's about what we do with what we've learned tonight. Maya looked over at him, nodding. She had been thinking the same thing. Yeah, she said, her voice thoughtful. I've been thinking a lot about that. It's not enough for us to just let this slide. If we don't speak up, nothing changes. And who knows how many other people have been treated the way we were, but didn't say anything. Jamal nodded, his eyes scanning the room. Exactly. I mean, we were lucky. We had Dad on our side, but there are so many people out there who don't have that kind of support. And even with Dad helping, it wasn't easy. It took a lot to get things moving. Maya could feel the weight of his words. They had been fortunate in so many ways, having a father who could use his influence to make things right, having the resources to stand up for themselves. But they also knew that many people didn't have those same advantages. And that made them wonder how many others had quietly suffered, unseen and unheard. We can't just let this be another thing that happened, Maya said, her voice growing stronger. We need to do something with this. If nothing else, we need to make sure people know that it's okay to speak up. It's okay to fight back when things aren't right. Jamal smiled, his eyes lighting up. Exactly. It's not about getting even or being angry. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. We can use our voices to help others. Maya felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She realized that this moment, this experience had given her a new understanding of what it meant to stand up for what was right. It wasn't just about fighting for herself or Jamal. It was about using their position, their voices, to help others who didn't have the same resources or support. As they sat there, lost in their thoughts, the atmosphere around them seemed to change. The event continued, but it felt different now. There was a sense of unity in the air, a sense that something had shifted. Perhaps it was the apology from the event staff, or maybe it was the quiet satisfaction that came from knowing they had stood their ground. But whatever it was clear that their actions had made an impact. Maya turned to Jamal, a smile spreading across her face. "You know, I think we did something good tonight," she said. "Not just for us, but for everyone who's ever been treated this way. Maybe this will make a difference." Jamal grinned. "I think it already has." As the night went on, Maya and Jamal began to reflect on the power of standing up for what's right. It wasn't always easy, and sometimes it felt like the world was pushing back. But in that moment, they realized that their voices mattered. They could make a difference, and so could anyone else who was willing to speak up. Their father's involvement had been instrumental in making sure things were resolved, but it was their courage to stand up in the first place that had set everything in motion. They had refused to be silenced, and in doing so, they had sent a message to everyone around them that no matter who you were or where you came from, you deserved respect. No one should ever feel like they didn't belong, not in any space, not in any room, not anywhere. The event came to a close, and as Maya and Jamal stood to leave, they felt a sense of pride. It wasn't just because they had been right, but because they had been a part of something bigger than themselves. They had shown that standing up for what was right could lead to real change. And they had done it together. As they walked out of the event hall, hand in hand, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. She was determined to carry this lesson with her, to keep speaking up and to keep fighting for justice in every way she could. She knew that their actions had been a small step in a long journey, but every step mattered. And it was up to people like her, people who had the courage to stand up, to lead the way. Jamal looked over at her and smiled. "We did good, Maya. We really did." Maya smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Yeah, we did. And we'll keep doing good, every chance we get." Together, they walked into the future with a newfound sense of purpose, knowing that their fight for respect and justice was just beginning.